Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight, starting with a desperate search for a sub with 5 people on board that disappeared on a trip to explore the Titanic.
So the weather at that site as of just a few hours ago earlier today made it really difficult for visual search.
And search crews are still racing against the clock, saying if the sub is still intact, they only have about 70 hours of oxygen available on board. And close call after close call. Delta and United planes bumping into each other before takeoff. Why are we seeing all these jetliner fender benders happening on the tarmac these days?
It was a little shocking. Everyone didn't know what was going on. And they were like, what happened? What happened?
And on this Juneteenth, we are bringing you to the birthplace of the holiday, Galveston, Texas, where in 1865, thousands of enslaved people finally found out they were free.
We're working to become a more perfect union by fixing the cracks in the foundation of our storytelling. And this expands the narrative about this history, not only here in Galveston, but in America.
And we start tonight with the clock ticking on a critical search happening right now in the North Atlantic Ocean for a missing sub and its crew. The sub was on a research trip to the Titanic wreckage site more than 2 miles underwater when it disappeared Sunday morning. The U.S. Coast Guard says they are searching an area 900 miles off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Now, that submersible craft itself has 5 people on board, and the Coast Guard says contact with the crew was lost 1 hour and 45 minutes into a planned 6-hour dive. It has oxygen and enough oxygen supply, which is supposed to last about 96 hours. So there is still very much a chance that the crew could still be alive. And Gabe Gutierrez joins us now. Gabe, we know this sub was launched from a nearby support ship. Then they lost contact. How do they not know where it is right now?
Well, that is the big question at this point, Gadi. And the Coast Guard is trying desperately to find this. There's search and rescue personnel, not just from the U.S., but also Canada is looking into this. And as you said, this is all happening about 900 miles to the east of Cape Cod. And the Titanic wreckage is 13,000 feet deep in that water. So as you can imagine, it is a vast, remote area. And from what we know, this is what's called a submersible, not exactly a submarine. A submarine can, by itself, it has the power to go to and from port. This submersible, as it's called, has to be attached to some sort of mothership, and it somehow lost contact. It's usually tied to it. It lost communication on Sunday. And take a listen to what one of the search team officials said a little earlier today about that search, Gadi.
So the weather at that site as of just a few hours ago earlier today made it really difficult for visual search. Our crews in their aircraft have been using visual search when able, but primarily relying on radar return search from the surface.
So the weather you describe as low visibility, are we talking rain? Are we talking fog, high swells? What is it like?
I understand from the crews that it's a combination of rain and low clouds, fog, which just making it difficult to see.
That was my colleague Tom Costello speaking with that Coast Guard official, Gadi. And right now they have sonar buoys out there listening for sound. And they have more aircraft now going to that area because, Gadi, that's the challenge. They not only have to search for the submersible potentially on the surface of the water, but also in that huge swath of ocean right there near the Titanic's wreckage, Gadi.
So we don't know if it's on the surface. We don't know if it's underwater. But if it is underwater, I mean, there is so much pressure. 13,000 feet is just hard to wrap your mind around. Can it handle that kind of pressure for this long of a time?
Well, the Coast Guard says that it does have emergency capabilities for 96 hours. And that is why this is such a race against time, right? They think that they right now have at least 70 hours left and that they can either find this this submersible, or get to it in the period of time in the next few days. The hope is that those 5 people that were inside would still be alive, and the craft would have been able to withstand that pressure. But again, 96 hours of emergency capabilities, and that's what the hope is right now. That's what those families of those who are on that submersible are hoping for.
And Gabe, this isn't an ordinary tourist trip, right? This is an extremely expensive expedition, a lot of training. People pay to go on these types of expeditions. I think we actually have some sound of how people who have made this dive before described previous missions. Let's take a look.
We are trying to make a really good map of the site and its current state.
This is not tourism. You're contributing. It's not a ride at Disney. There's a lot of real risk involved, and there's a lot of challenges.
So what do we know about the people on board this sub? What kind of training did they get?
Well, Gadi, you're right. They don't call them tourists. They're referred to as mission specialists. And we're now learning more about one of them. He's a billionaire. His name is Hamish Harding, and the managing director of Action Aviation just confirmed over the phone to NBC News that he is one of those 5 people on board. And now the cost for these excursions can run up to $250,000 for this and other dives. So again, it's not cheap, but the people who go on these trips, again referred to as mission specialists, they are allowed to go there and they undergo some training, but relatively minimal training to go down there and do that. But again, the company says that they are, that they go out there in order to underwrite these missions, in order to do research on the wreckage of the Titanic. So yes, not everybody gets to go down there, not your typical tourists, but certainly all these family members now of these 5 people aboard are anxiously awaiting any word on when they might be found, Gadi.
Here's hoping that they are found safe and alive. Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much. And people from Texas to the Gulf are still recovering from those powerful storms that swept through this weekend. At least 6 people died from all that extreme weather. And this is what people in Logan, Mississippi woke up to. This massive tornado that touched down last night, killing at least 1 person there. 20 other people were hurt. And another tornado tore through Logan County, Arkansas on Sunday. Several homes were damaged and at least 80,000 people lost power. Neighbors there are helping one another sift through all that wreckage.
We rode it out, went outside. There were trees down everywhere. Spent most of the night out running around, checking on everybody, cutting down trees and whatnot.
This is all happening after the devastating tornado in Perryton, Texas. That's where a huge tornado touched down, killing 3 people. The community has come together to help each other through that recovery. And NBC's Jay Gray asked one business owner there named Oscar about the toll all that cleanup is taken.
How are you doing emotionally right now?
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. But I got friends and family helping me, so.
And NBC News correspondent Jay Gray is at a relief center in Perryton right now. Jay, what's it like at the relief center?
Yeah, Gadi, well, I can tell you that there's been an outpouring of support here, an outpouring of generosity, and let's show you a little bit of what's going on. I can start right here with all of the over-the-counter drugs, things that people will need, things that you normally take for granted, but that have been lost by more than 200 families whose homes are basically gone. You've got the toiletries here, and then clothes. So many clothes have been donated, and they are in every room of this church. You can see they've got the adult clothes here, and as you walk down the halls here and into other areas of the church, they've got children's clothes, they've got things for babies. They've really got everything that these folks will need as they try and get things cleaned up and start on the recovery here. And that's going to be a difficult process. You can see the diapers here on the other side of the hallway. You've got the baby food. And then as you walk into what is normally a gym, you'll see this is where they're storing a lot of the food. You've got just cases and cases of water and more in the back back. You've got food that folks can take to wherever they're staying right now and have some food. And then they've prepared today, the Mercy chefs out of Virginia, more than 2,000 hot meals. So they're doing everything they can, Gadi, to try and help those who have been really just overwhelmed by the EF3 tornado that ripped through this small community. 8,000 or so live here.
All the day-to-day necessities that we take for granted. So is this a mix of people donating? Is this the local government there, the state and federal government? Or, you know, I know a lot of people were hoping that FEMA was going to be there. Is this an effort from the federal government, or is this kind of a mixed bag?
It's a great question, Gadi, and right now it's donations. A majority of this, all donations, some from the city here, but most of it from individuals or corporations that are looking to help. As we talked about, it's a very small town, so to reach that threshold of damage in a dollar amount where they can qualify for state or even federal funds is going to be very difficult. The mayor says they're trying to get to that level and understand that of those that have seen the worst damage here, he estimates maybe as many as 90% don't have any insurance, that they're living paycheck to paycheck. And so that makes it even more difficult for those who have been hit so hard here.
Yeah, it's good to see the community coming together, but there's still so much help needed. NBC's Jay Gray, thanks so much. And let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, a lot happened this weekend. What's our week looking like right now?
Gadi, I think it's going to slow down a little bit. I mean, we're not going to get as much severe weather. There'll be isolated cases, I'm sure, of flash flooding and isolated tornadoes, but nothing as organized and hopefully destructive as what we've been through in the last 4 to 5 days. So these are the areas of concern as we go into your Tuesday. Once again, we're focusing on the Gulf Coast. Today, the worst of it was by far the Mobile area. Possibility of 2 tornadoes, flash flood emergency. It was just a nightmare. The thunderstorm just sat over the area for like 2 or 3 hours. Tomorrow, we're going to push it towards Biloxi, the New Orleans area, to Baton Rouge, Alexander to Lake Charles, and they get isolated tornado or 2, but mostly damaging wind threat as we go throughout your Tuesday. And as far as other concerns go, we're going to see a chance for some significant rainfall this week. So we're going to hear more and more about flash flooding possible in areas of the Carolinas. This storm is going to sit here. So this is Wednesday. Heavy rain on and off. It's not going to rain all the time, but thunderstorms. And then even as we go into Thursday and even into Friday, the rain is going to sit. And when we talk about heavy rain in the mountainous areas of the Appalachians, especially areas like Asheville and Boone, Chattanooga, all the areas, southern and central Appalachians, Gadi, we're going to have to watch very carefully to see what happens there in the days ahead.
And Bill, I know that technically hurricane season has started, right? And we're starting to see some tropical depressions forming, some storms forming, and not just 1, but 2. Is that normal right now?
It's not. It's not like overly alarming, like, you know, what's happening, but it's unusual. Nothing since we've been, recording, which goes back satellite era to the 1960s. So this is Brett. This is the tropical storm. If you take, if you look at the Atlantic and you divided it in half, this storm has formed further to the east than any storm has ever formed this early in the season. We've had other storms form in January and March closer to the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico or just off the East Coast, but it's very unusual this far out into the Atlantic. So that's Brett. So that's the first one we're going to deal with. And what really gets your attention with this was not only has it formed in an unusual spot, but it's actually going to get stronger than most storms do this time of year. The Hurricane Center has it going up to a Category 1, going through the Windward or Leeward Islands, somewhere possibly near Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico by the time we get to this weekend. We're hoping that the upper-level winds from El Nino tear this apart by the time we get there. And then the one behind it, so that's Brett, and this is trying to form, too, another tropical wave, which is even crazier to think we could have 2 in the same location, but the weather pattern favors it, and the ocean temperatures are favoring it, too. So that one I don't think is going to be a huge problem, Gadi.
So now we just cross our fingers that El Nino disrupts those, yeah?
Yeah, El Nino means that the upper-level winds will be stronger, especially when the storms get towards the Caribbean. So this is where Brett is developing here. We call it, the main development region that's inside this red box. So as the storms move closer to the Caribbean, El Nino should increase the winds that will tear the thunderstorms apart, weakening the storms. Fingers crossed that El Nino is strong enough and can disrupt a lot of these storms because the ocean is plenty warm to give us a lot of trouble, as we're seeing already.
All right, El Nino, do your thing.
We're counting on it, yeah.
Yeah. NBC's Bill Cairns, thanks so much. And turning now to what was a very violent weekend. More than 20 people shot at just one Juneteenth celebration, even more caught by gunfire across the nation. In fact, according to the Gun Violence Archive, it looks like around 112 people were killed and 73 people were hurt since Saturday. All of it happening as temperatures start to soar, which might not sound like it's related, and every case is different, but the stats suggest things could start getting even worse. NBC's Jesse Kirsch joins us now from Cleveland, Ohio. Jesse, can you walk us through what we saw this weekend?
Yeah, Gadi, dozens of people shot, numerous people killed across the country. This was not isolated to just one community, one state, one city. Unfortunately, this was across the U.S. on a holiday weekend, no less. This incident that's getting a lot of attention in Willowbrook, Illinois, outside of Chicago, saw 23 people shot, according to officials, with one person killed. This was a Saturday evening Juneteenth celebration, a peaceful get-together, we're told, at a strip mall. And then in the overnight hours, it turned violent and deadly, according to officials. Here's what one person shared about what they witnessed on the scene.
Then when the gunshots happened, we heard the sirens, and then within, 10, 15 minutes, there was probably like 50 cops along with EMS.
There were deadly shootings, as I mentioned, in numerous communities across the country. I just want to mention a couple of them, Gadi. In Kellogg, Idaho, 4 people were shot and killed in an incident with a suspect in custody there, according to officials. In Washington, D.C., we know of 2 teenagers who were killed. In St. Louis, a 17-year-old was killed in a shooting where 10 people overall were shot. These are just some of the incidents cascading across the country over the weekend, Gadi.
And Jesse, there's some numbers out there that caught our eye. It looks like overall violence tends to increase in the summer months, but there's this new study out that's finding that gun violence trends might also be tied to the climate crisis. What does that link actually look like?
Yeah, there's some research, Gadi, coming out from Boston University talking about a correlation between especially hot days and surges in violence. And I say correlation, we know, right, the adage correlation does not equal causation. So researchers, according to this information we've gone over, seem to still be working through what that association might be. But they point to the possibility that heat causes stress for people, and also if it's hotter out, people may be more likely to be outside interacting with others, which could lead, unfortunately, to more violent interactions. And so these researchers pointing to the possibility that creating more green spaces in an urban space, which can be looked at as a heat island, might be able to mitigate some violence. But, again, I just want to stress this is just an association. They're not talking about any specific causes here yet. Certainly, this is the kind of research that I think needs to be proven out more based on what I'm reading here. But I can't tell you, Gadi, having been a reporter in Chicago for years, especially working weekends or early mornings on the weekends in the aftermath of a lot of violent incidents. I know that in the summer months, we would always be bracing on a hot summer's day for the next morning to be talking about a lot of violence having unfolded the night before, specifically when it was hot and sunny out in those summer months. So certainly this is something that I think people think about in communities all over the country. And obviously we are just on the cusp of summer here right now across the U.S. Gadi.
Something that we've seen here in L.A. too. Jesse, thanks so much. And still ahead this hour, a lot of developing stories here on the West Coast. A rolling gun battle in San Francisco leaves 6 victims in its wake. What police are saying happened there. Plus, a man is dead after he was attacked by a black bear while drinking a morning cup of coffee at a campsite. Those details are coming up, so stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. San Francisco police are investigating a shooting at Pier 39. It all happened around 7 last night, leaving 6 people hurt. And officers think that 2 cars were involved in some sort of rolling gun battle that went on for nearly a mile. And President Biden is here in California today, where he's talking about fighting climate change. He's pledged $600 million to help coastal communities across the United States protect from the crisis. And going back east real quick to Philadelphia, where crews are still working to fix that part of I-95 that collapsed last week. Governor Josh Shapiro is now saying he's confident it could reopen in the next 2 weeks. And pop star Bibi Rexha had to go to the hospital yesterday after a guy threw his cell phone at her face while she was on stage in New York. And the man was taken into custody and charged with assault. Rexha posted a video update today with a bruised eye saying she's fine. 5 people, including a father and his 2 sons, are dead after a fire destroyed a home near Raleigh, North Carolina. They were staying with 2 of their friends who were also killed, and police are still trying to figure out what caused that fire. So, you know how we've been talking a lot about former President Donald Trump's knack for firing off on his social media site about his court cases and his enemies? Well, there are some new developments tonight in that classified documents case. And a judge is now telling Trump he can't share or keep any evidence that the government turns over to him in that case. And they're starting to do that as part of the discovery process. Now, the judge here is trying to make sure none of this info gets to the media or is posted on social media. And Trump was indicted earlier this month on 37 felony federal counts related to withholding classified documents and conspiracy to obstruct justice. NBC's Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now. Ken, tell us, what does this order cover and what does it limit when it comes to what Trump can have access to?
Gadi, good evening. This is a really standard protective order that you would see in many different kinds of cases, and it does limit what Donald Trump can see in terms of the discovery. That's all the evidence in the case that prosecutors have been gathering for the last year. They now have to turn it over to Donald Trump and his defense counsel, right? But there are limits in this order on what Donald Trump can have access to. That he can't actually keep any of the documents. Only his lawyers can. Even if he takes notes under this order, his lawyers have to keep custody of those notes. And most importantly, this order prohibits either Donald Trump or his lawyers from disclosing any of this information to the news media. And what we're talking here about witness lists, the testimony of witnesses, some things that could be very sensitive and subject people to death threats even. They're not allowed to make that public. Now, this order does not cover the classified information in this case, Gadi. That's going to be subject to an entirely different procedure under the Classified Information Procedures Act. There's going to be an officer appointed to write some rules for how that information can be handled. Donald Trump's attorneys are going to have to obtain, and they already are in the process of trying to obtain security clearances. This is just for the non-classified stuff, the witness list and other sensitive information. But nonetheless, it's designed to make sure exactly what you said, because Donald Trump has a habit, right, of tweeting out things that he learns from his lawyers in legal cases. He is barred from doing that under this order.
This sounds like the specifics and the particulars, but is there anything to stop him from going off on the prosecutors or possibly even the judges here?
No, this does not cover. He has a First Amendment right to insult the prosecutors. There may at some point be some conversations about that, though, if the judge decides that he's crossing a line into almost inciting violence or, or impugning the integrity. There's some, the judge has some leeway here. But, you may also ask, well, how is this enforceable, right? And the answer is, it's not necessarily. They would have to prove, if something leaks to the news media, they would have to prove, just like in any other leaks case, that it came from Donald Trump or his lawyers, and that's notoriously difficult to do. But they would know that if they ever got caught doing that, there could be serious consequences, including contempt of court and even jail in the most extreme cases, Gadi.
Ken Delanian, thanks so much.
You bet.
And now turning to something you definitely don't want to see when you look out the window of a plane. Your plane's wing clipping another plane while you taxi on the tarmac. But check out this clipping of wings that happened at Logan Airport in Boston between a United flight and a parked Delta flight. It turns out this is the 8th time this year that 2 planes have either collided or nearly crashed at U.S. airports. And the FAA is now taking a closer look at why and how this keeps happening. NBC's Sam Brock has the details.
Oh, it did. Oh, my God. The FAA is investigating yet another close call after authorities say the wing of a United Airlines flight clipped the tail of a Delta plane at Boston's Logan International Airport on Friday. Passenger video showing the United aircraft taxiing and slowly colliding with the tail of the parked Delta plane.
I knew it was going to happen. It looked like it. Yeah, it hit the other plane.
Rick Fredrickson and his 11-year-old son Daniel were on board the United flight bound for Newark when they saw the two planes inching closer.
I felt a thump that didn't seem right, like as soon as you felt it.
It was a little shocking. Everyone didn't know what was going on, and they were like, what happened? What happened?
Emergency crews quickly arrived, and the planes were towed back to their gates. The airlines say passengers were rebooked on new flights, and there were no reported injuries. According to the FAA, the two aircraft had been in a holding area waiting to get on the runway.
There's no one outside to direct you. It's up to the pilots to look around and see, to make sure that their wing clearance is not going to hit anything. And sometimes that can be difficult.
Friday's incident, just the latest in a string of close calls. Last week, a near miss in Minneapolis, after the FAA says an air traffic controller cleared a Delta flight to depart from runway 30 left.
At Delta, cross 30 left.
But then cleared an American Airlines plane to land on that same runway.
American 2406, clear to land, runway 30 left.
Realizing the mistake, the controller ordered the American flight to go around.
American 2406, I thought you were going on the right side, sir.
You said left side. Sorry.
American 2406, turn left heading 280.
But the American plane ended up flying directly above the Delta aircraft that was sitting on the runway. Federal authorities say they're now investigating that incident, too. Sam Brock, NBC News.
Sam, thank you. And coming up, nurses are walking off the job in Oregon. We're going to tell you why and when we come back. But first, you got to see this. These surfers were in for quite a treat at Pacific Beach in San Diego. A baby seal was climbing on surfboards, hoping to catch a wave. That pup is apparently out there living on its own, clearly looking for a new hobby. And by the way, apparently seals do have 5 digits on each flipper, so technically that little guy can hang 10. We'll be right back. Hey there, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Rescuers are right now racing against the clock to find a missing sub in the Atlantic Ocean. That underwater sub had 5 people inside that were headed to visit the Titanic shipwreck. And it was a violent weekend with more than 100 people killed in shootings across the country, and experts are worried we're just starting to see an uptick. And another near collision between 2 planes on a runway in Boston. This makes the 8th time this year planes have either collided or come close to crashing. And officials say a man in Arizona was killed by a black bear in what looks like an unprovoked attack. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer has more.
Attacks like these are considered incredibly rare, and now authorities in Arizona are trying to determine exactly what may have provoked that bear to kill.
RP reporting that the neighbor was being attacked by a bear.
In what's being described as a vicious, unprovoked attack, authorities say on Friday in this rural area of northern Arizona, an adult male black bear mauled a 66-year-old man to death. Witnesses telling sheriff's deputies Stephen Jackson was having a cup of coffee on his property where he had begun building a cabin when the bear approached him and attacked. Jackson's screams heard by neighbors who tried to distract the bear and stop the brutal scene.
There was honking horns, different things that they were doing. There was no success in stopping the attack.
The bear dragged Jackson about 75 yards down a nearby hill before one neighbor arrived with a rifle.
The bear has been shot.
The bear is down. I have visual on it, and it's not moving.
The neighbor killed the bear, but it was too late for Jackson, who died from his injuries.
Nothing jumped out at us as being obvious of why this occurred or what brought the bear to this location. This attack appears to be predatory in nature.
Adult male black bears can weigh up to 600 pounds, but despite their intimidating size, attacks are incredibly rare. With about 300,000 living in the U.S., there's only about 1 fatal attack per year. Experts think the animal involved in this fatal run-in may have been in search of food or felt it needed to protect its surroundings.
It could be this terrible situation where the man, unbeknownst to him, was building property in the bear's territory, and the bear is trying to defend that.
Now, with summer approaching, encounters may become more common as bears awake from hibernation and roam for food, and humans head outdoors.
Experts actually say black bears are the least aggressive species. They say if you encounter a black bear while out in the wilderness, it's best to simply back away, raise your voice, and make yourself appear as big as possible. Back to you.
Good advice there. Around 1,800 nurses are on strike in Portland, Oregon tonight, while negotiations are still underway with the hospital for a new contract. But where is that leaving the community? Thomas Schultz from our NBC affiliate KGW has more.
We have seen them for this entire week shipping patients out to other facilities.
Beginning at 5:30 Monday morning, Molly Burchell and around 1,800 other Providence Hospital nurses in Portland, Seaside, and hospice care will strike for 5 days.
We are feeling demoralized.
They say negotiations with Providence have been ongoing for 9 months, but they haven't negotiated since June 8th. Burchell says that's due to Providence's decision not to negotiate once a strike was authorized. While nurses picket, Providence officials say people should expect longer wait times at the Portland location. Elective surgeries will be paused, the neonatal ICU will close, and baby deliveries will move. Patient transfers from other hospitals will also be reduced significantly. The only surgeries that will not be paused will be life and death cases.
We're doing the best that we can to continue to provide care for our patients.
Gentry says Providence Portland provides services for 400 patients a day. 20 patients are served daily in Seaside. She says Providence will continue to provide critical services during the strike. Providence officials say they have offered nurses a 12% pay increase in the first year of the contract. In the next 2 years, they say nurses would receive additional 3% raises. A Providence statement says the latest offer also included bonuses of up to $2,500 and 30 additional hours of paid time off over 3 years. Officials say the average full-time nurse makes $128,000 a year, but nurses say other concerns are not being met.
They consistently are tone deaf.
Burchell says Providence needs to do a better job of hiring and retaining nurses.
It is not just about money. It is about safe staffing. It is about adequate leave time, enough time, paid time off to take care of ourselves and take care of our families.
She says nurses are also asking for more affordable health care that includes mental health care. Burchell says nurses are ready to return to work Friday night after the strike, but Providence contracted replacement nurses until Saturday morning. Providence officials declined to comment on the intricacies of the contract with replacement nurses.
And that was Thomas Schultz from our NBC affiliate KGW reporting. And today is Juneteenth, a federal holiday in the United States celebrating not just the end of slavery, but the specific day Union soldiers carried word of emancipation into the state of Texas on this day in 1865. It's a day of reflection on the progress that's been made since then, but also on the work that still needs to be done. NBC's Aaron Gilchrist traveled to Galveston, the birthplace of Juneteenth, where a powerful sculpture is helping to tell the story of the African-American experience.
What do you see in these faces? Anguish, determination, innocence, just some of the words painted in my mind by the Blank Slate Monument.
I haven't lived the African-American experience. I've only observed from afar.
39-year-old Ghanaian artist and activist Kwame Akoto-Bamfo's work examines restorative justice for people of African descent around the world. He created this sculpture, a powerful collection of moments telling the story of African Americans.
It's trying to highlight everything that we have been through, our ancestors have been through, the struggle and then the freedom tradition that they've been a part of, and that we are continuing.
The statue also designed to be a counter-narrative in a country once awash in Confederate monuments. It has no base, no pedestal, which Akoto-Bamfo says is a symbol of white privilege. It's simply a stack of bodies, flush against the ground, an African slave shackled, a foot on his face, but he's not crushed. He's supporting.
We have a Union soldier standing on the very body of his enslaved ancestor. And then he continues to carry the current generation who also has a baby on her back.
The soldier with a noose around his neck, still holding a tattered American flag and uplifting an activist mother.
It is a call to action that your voice now will make you another body on which your descendants can step on to reach higher.
At the very top, a blank slate, a digital screen on which anyone who sees the statue can project a message, a reaction, a word about life in America. Sue Johnson runs the NIA Cultural Center in Galveston, Texas. She helped bring the Blank Slate Monument here to her hometown.
I thought that I was going to be jubilant, but it's kind of dark, you know, but hopeful at the same time. The feature of the Blank Slate that allows the viewers to put a message out there, that's just another opportunity for free speech, which I think is so important, especially in this time.
For the past 2 years, the statue has traveled the U.S., evoking emotions from Pittsburgh to Atlanta, from New York's Times Square to the nation's capital. Everywhere it's gone, drawing crowds, making people think.
It's very inspirational. It has a lot of messages speaking through it.
It looks like they're stepping on one another, but in fact, they're building on each other's sacrifices. And the visual is, to me, conflicting about that. Very powerful piece.
It's almost like they're demanding to be heard, especially the lady at the top.
And that we have to help each other progress forward. That's what I get from it.
The Blank Slate Monument ends its U.S. tour here in Galveston, the same city where the ending of slavery in America ended more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
On June 19, 1865, federal ships sailed into Galveston Bay. They were carrying Union Army soldiers, including thousands of black soldiers. They were also carrying a message of freedom and the means to enforce it.
That day is what we now call Juneteenth. Galveston historian Sam Collins.
It was not a piece of paper that freed the enslaved people of Texas, but the men with the guns.
Collins says there was no grand announcement of freedom. Rather, soldiers mass printing and posting the famed General Order No. 3 changed life in Texas.
They were, as some say, free-ish, because in the order it also says the former enslaved are to remain at their present homes and work for wages.
The change was indeed celebrated and still is generations later. A Juneteenth parade in the streets of Galveston this weekend. Families, whole communities gathering in Jubilee with an eye on their ancestry.
We honor their memory when we commemorate Juneteenth every year, and we've been doing it here in Galveston for 158 years.
Collins now leading the effort to establish an international Juneteenth museum in Galveston, his team working to find a buyer for the Blank Slate Monument so it can stay in this history-rich city.
We're working to become a more perfect union by fixing the cracks in the foundation of our storytelling. And this expands the narrative about this history, not only here in Galveston, but in America.
Wow, what an incredible story. And Aaron Gilchrist joins us now. Aaron, I mean, such unforgettable images, the hand holding the foot, the lack of a pedestal. I imagine it's something to see in real life there. What happens to that statue after this stop there in Galveston?
Yeah, it really does leave an impression for sure, Gadi. Right now, the statue is supposed to be in Galveston until July 5th. It will likely stay there a little bit longer, but the folks behind this effort tell me that they have had sponsors as it's toured the country. Right now, they plan to put it in storage for the summer while they look for a buyer.
It also incredible to hear so many people talking about looking at that. I got to ask, I mean, you were there when you first saw that statue. What went through your mind?
You know, it definitely causes you to pause when you first see that face of the enslaved person at the bottom of the statue. It is jarring. It is something that stirs up a lot of emotion. I can tell you I felt sad initially looking at it, and then you sort of think about the story as you go up the sculpture, and you realize that there's a message of hope at the top of that sculpture, and it's one that people who organize this want to be carried out across the country as the statue potentially continues on in a museum possibly here in the U.S.
Aaron, incredible story, and that sentiment you just described is exactly what came through on that story. I can't thank you enough, brother.
Thank you.
And after the break, some of the biggest stories happening all around the world. The heat wave sounds like an understatement when it comes to what's happening in India. Sweltering temperatures are taking over parts of the country, and it is creating a very dangerous situation. That's coming up next, so stay with us. Hey there, welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. A top military leader in Ukraine says troops liberated a village near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant this weekend. Ukraine has retaken at least 8 villages in their revamped efforts to fight back against Russian forces. The British Ministry of Defense is saying there have been heavy losses. And nearly 100 people have died during an absolutely sweltering heat wave gripping India right now. Hundreds more have been hospitalized in two of the country's most populous states, and one district saw temperatures as high as 113 degrees. And voters in Switzerland have backed a new climate referendum, all to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Now, the government there says that the country needs to protect its energy security and environment as glaciers rapidly melt in the Swiss Alps. The majority of voters supported that move. And Egyptian dog owners are speaking out against a new law banning specific breeds. Now, the government outlawed 16 dog breeds they deemed dangerous in the country, and that includes pit bulls, Rottweilers, and Huskies. And all of this comes after a man was killed by one of those kinds of dogs, and now owners will have 1 month to surrender their pets. And overseas, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is calling his high-stakes visit to China an important start. Now, the top U.S. diplomat and President Xi Jinping spoke for about 35 minutes face-to-face. Both sides say they made progress, but they didn't have a significant breakthrough. And NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer sat down with Secretary Blinken and talked all things from that spy balloon to defense channels. Take a look.
This was a high-stakes visit by Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Beijing, looking to stop what officials describe as the downward spiral with China. The trip was punctuated with a 35-minute meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. In an interview after that meeting, Secretary Blinken told me this visit marks an important start in stabilizing relations, which Chinese officials have described as being in the lowest valley since relations started. Both sides have been wanting to appear the more responsible in managing the relationship, so, as they say, competition doesn't veer into conflict. Here's more of what Secretary Blinken had to say.
It's a good and I think important start. Both China and the United States, I think, recognize that we were in an increasingly unstable place in our relationship. I think this is the start of a process to put a little more stability into it. Both of us recognize that we have an obligation to responsibly manage the relationship. And that starts with communicating, with actually engaging across our government. And this was an opportunity to do that, an opportunity to make very clear where our deep differences are and to have very detailed conversations about that, as well as to see if there are areas where, in our mutual interest, we might actually cooperate.
This visit did not secure assurances from Beijing that China was willing to reopen defense channels of communication. These are direct lines between the U.S. and Chinese militaries to avoid any miscalculation or misinterpretation, which is becoming increasingly important given the close calls, near collisions in the Taiwan Strait and over the South China Sea. However, this visit does appear to be paving the way for more high-level visits from the U.S., from the Commerce and Treasury secretaries, perhaps within the next few weeks, and possibly Xi Jinping traveling to the U.S. to meet with President Biden before the end of the year.
NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer. Thanks so much. Before we go, celebrating Juneteenth out on the water. Black surfers are looking to grow this sport that was once a huge part of African culture. That story's coming up next, so stay tuned. And tonight on The Future of Everything, we're going to remind you of something you probably already know. There are cameras everywhere, not just on our phones, but in stores, street corners, intersections. And those photos, that data could be used to track license plates and ultimately women seeking abortion over state lines. NBC's Ann Thompson has more on access and privacy rights.
If it feels like you are being tracked, it may be because you are, at red lights, going in and out of the office, on your smartphone. But what if you could be tracked seeking a legal abortion simply by your license plate?
I don't think people realize how much of their personal data is collected, that their whereabouts are tracked.
That's why Illinois Secretary of State Alexei Janulius backs what he says is a first-in-the-nation bill to outlaw sharing or selling license plate data for women seeking abortions.
Who has access to license plate trackers?
A number of private and public entities have this personal, sensitive data.
Data he fears could be weaponized as some states try to criminalize helping someone get an abortion, even in a state where it is legal. 3 other states have passed laws aimed at protecting health data from such efforts.
When they travel, whether it's to an abortion clinic or the grocery store, we need to make sure this data is protected.
Illinois Right to Life Executive Director Mary Kate Zander opposes abortion. Do you think this bill is necessary?
I think it's unnecessary. They're trying to create a narrative around what the pro-life movement may or may not be doing in this.
She says her organization is not trying to criminalize women seeking the procedure. Is the Right to Life movement tracking license plates of women?
No.
Absolutely
not.
Has it done that in the past?
No.
Do you see it doing that in the future?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's just not a tactic that we would use.
With a quarter of their patients now from out of state, Illinois Planned Parenthood CEO Jennifer Welch is not convinced.
Patients need to know that when they come for health care, that information won't be shared with anybody, law enforcement, activists, anybody else.
Data collection and privacy, a new frontier in the nation's fight over abortion rights. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Chicago.
And if you surf, you know that heading out to a break, there's usually not a lot of diversity when it comes to who you're sharing those waves with. And black representation is something that has been sorely missing. And experts say a lot of it dates back to racist segregation laws. But apparently, it has been a part of African culture for about 1,000 years. And NBC News correspondent Nyla Charles spoke with 2 surfers working to reconnect black people to the sport.
On the California coast, black dads are surfing with their children to celebrate Juneteenth. Some are first-timers, others are experienced, together reclaiming a historic tradition.
Surfing was part of African culture 1,000 years back then.
David Mesvin highlighted this history in his documentary, Wade in the Water.
There's been a community for a while, and now it's time for us to embrace it and own it.
That's where surfers saw Philly Maturi and Bayan Abraha come in. Together, they found SoFly Surf School to teach black communities how to surf for free, countering the long-held stereotype that black people can't swim, let alone surf.
You have to, show, you know?
I love that challenge. Me personally, I love that challenge.
Historians say even after segregation kept generations of African Americans from pools and beaches, discrimination continued the pattern.
Post-World War II, they were shutting down as African Americans were having freedom to go and swim with white folks.
But now these surfers are using the water to heal generations.
That's all you! That's all you! As African Americans, it's important for us to understand our history and to really deeply connect to the ocean for multiple reasons, whether it's spiritual, whether it's mental, whether it's physical.
When you're teaching people how to surf, do they have an initial apprehension?
Almost every single person is pretty apprehensive.
What is it like the moment they get it?
I mean, you can see it in their eyes, that light bulb effect.
The SoFly team even showed me with my first lesson.
I feel like I'm a coordinated person that is scared of water.
Something I never thought I'd do. We started on land.
Not going to lie, my arms hurt already.
Okay.
They thought I'd get it my first try. But the first wave got me down and many after that. I tried to stay positive.
I'm one with the water.
There you go.
The wave cannot get me down.
With help from my producer.
We're having fun right now.
We're having fun right now. Okay.
After a last-minute technique adjustment, success.
Yes!
I did it!
Yeah, you did it.
I caught a wave! Fourth quarter!
Now all of us part of a growing community reclaiming our right to the waves.
Oh, and NBC's Nyala Charles joins us now. Nyala, congratulations. Your first wave. I mean, what'd you think?
Well, I'm still standing. I didn't drown, so that's a win. But for me, I almost didn't even take part in that story for the instruction because I was scared. I've never even swam in the ocean before. So I'm really glad I did it. I have no regrets. And it's really empowering, Gadi, to do something that you were scared to do.
Hey, wait, so not only was that your first time surfing, first time in the ocean?
Swimming. I usually just put my feet in and run out as
I gotta say,
as possible.
I surf, and I can tell you, right, like, I promise you, your first time looked much better than my first time. Are you gonna go back out?
I am. I think I need some more swimming lessons, though, because, again, not drowning was one of the biggest accomplishments I've had in that water. So
let's go. We got to go together.
Yes.
We'll document it. A lot of people talk about surfing as healing, and I got to say, my favorite part of surfing isn't necessarily catching the wave. Standing up is great, but it's almost like watching the waves come in and watching the waves form. Did you feel any of? Was it healing for you at all? Was it like zen?
It was healing for me because for me, just being comfortable in the water and being able to get on the board and swim through the water and dive into the waves when they're coming over my head so that they wouldn't knock me down was the biggest thing, because for so many years I was scared to do that. So I think that's what these organizations are doing to help different communities, black and brown, learn how to swim and get over that fear so that they can surf as well.
And now it's your responsibility to represent like the rest of us out there on the waves. So we got our job to do.
Right.
Nyala, can't wait.
Thanks.
Nyala Charles for the win. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.